and trying to make sure that everybody in the community understands how serious this is, and that we're only going to get through this if we all follow the public health guidance and if we come together by staying apart. So I've been changing it up, different things that I have. I show a little bit of spirit and support with things that I have around the house. So far it's worked out okay, but I've been trying to limit my trips outside to only what is absolutely necessary. I take a daily 5-mile wellness walk to try to keep up with my own mental and physical health. And other than that, I've really tried to stay in the house and do my work there, try to serve District 1. And
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Tuesday, April 21st, 2020 Montgomery County Council meeting. As we begin, I'm going to take a moment of a point of personal privilege. It was suggested that we take a minute at our council meetings to recognize someone in our community who is doing outstanding work to help us all. Montgomery County is blessed that there are so many who are so deserving of this minute of recognition. One council member each meeting will tell us about their hero. During the COVID-19 crisis, we are thankful for the many people who have stepped up to help those in need. The hero I would like to recognize is certainly helping during this crisis and started helping our community nearly 20 years ago. She is a woman of God and is quick to help those who are in need. She is an unbelievable speaker and a writer, poet, and a business owner. She has literally helped thousands from every walk of life. She feeds the hungry, especially our children. The hero I would like to recognize is Judith Clark, the Executive Director of Women Who Care Ministries, Inc. Montgomery County is fortunate to have her help us, and I am proud to call her my friend. Thank you, Judith, for being a hero and for all that you do for all of us. Thank you very much. And with that, Madam Clerk, do we have any announcements or petitions?
Yes, good morning, President Katz. We do not have any petitions. We've not received any petitions. We do have a few items on our addendum, however. On the consent calendar for 2C, we have deleted the action for the confirmation of the county executive appointment to the Consolidated Retiree Health Benefits Trust Board of Trustees. The action has been postponed to a future date to be determined. Also on the consent calendar, 2F, we have added the introduction of a special appropriation to the county government's FY20 operating budget, $2 million for COVID-19 Human Services Response and Community Assistance Non-Departmental Account, NDA, for housing, stabilization, and rental assistance. Source of funds, general fund reserves. Lead sponsor, County Council. Public hearing action is scheduled for 4/28/20. We also have a correction. Item 21, public hearing action. Special appropriation to the county government's FY20 operating budget, Department of General Services, the change from $500,000 to $250,000 for the purchase of face coverings and other personal protective equipment. Source of funds, general fund reserves. We have also added a proposed closed session to consult with counsel to obtain legal advice pursuant to Maryland Code General Provisions Article Section 3-305, subsection B7, and to discuss potential litigation pursuant to Maryland Code General Provisions Article Section 3-305, subsection B8. Topic is a pending contract dispute with a vendor. That is all, President Katz.
Thank you very much. The minutes have been distributed for March 13th, 2020. Unless there's any corrections, they're going to be approved as received. Next item that we have is the consent calendar, and we need a motion and a second for that, please.
So moved.
Councilmember Navarro and Councilmember Reamer seconded. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. And with that, Councilmember Reamer, you wanted to speak, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a brief comment on the nomination by the county executive for the director of the Department of Permitting Services. We had a very thorough interview last week, and the council asked a lot of really important questions about the county executive's agenda for that department, and the applicant, Mitra, who has a terrific career in Montgomery County and government, provided her intent to, upon taking the position, spend several months working on a reform agenda. It certainly was my hope that the county executive would have already had identified a reform agenda and provided that to Mitra to use in her work. I think that was what we have expected all along. But I do think that that she has heard and is well aware of our interest in making big improvements, and so I look forward to hearing about an aggressive reform agenda as she takes that position. So I'm pleased to support her and have had a long history working with her, but also want to state that we do need the executive branch to follow up, and we will certainly also follow up at committee on what work will be undertaken to bring that agency in line with the county executive's vision of making us the most competitive place for a business to operate. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to speak about item F, which is supplemental for rental assistance. In 10 days, rent is going to be due for the 130,000 renter households here in Montgomery County. And I know that I, along with all of you, my colleagues, have been receiving calls and emails and DMs from residents who are concerned. They're fearful of having to pay rent, given some of them have lost their jobs or are concerned about their economic future. And so that is why we as a council are putting forth this effort, because we recognize that there are residents in our community who do not have formal leases where they can contest any of the problems, and they're struggling to pay rent, and some don't qualify for the state or federal assistance that is being offered. And to broaden this out a little bit, nationally, 1 in 5 renters don't have $400 on hand for any unexpected costs. And at the beginning of this month, April, nearly 1/3 of renters in the United States did not pay rent in the first week of April. So we know that we are not immune to those statistics here in Montgomery County, where prior to this COVID-19 situation, nearly half of our renters were rent burdened. And so with May 1st right around the corner, the next rental due date, we expect renters to be even more cost burdened, given the situation with our economy locally and nationally. And so I'm really pleased to work in unison with all of you to introduce this $2 million supplemental that will be used for emergency eviction protection, housing stabilization, rapid rehousing, and a short-term rental subsidy program to aid low and moderate income households in response to this emergency. And the $2 million is just one part of a 4-part solution that's being put forth. Collectively as a council, we sent a letter to the county executive saying money is one part of the need, but we also need some regulatory changes as well. And just to highlight what those other aspects are, we identified administrative changes to expand the eligibility for rental assistance programs, such as the Housing Stabilization Fund and the Emergency Eviction Assistance Program. We also asked for the administration to help leverage private sector investment in partnership to have a 6-month transition after the emergency evictions are lifted, because we know that people will continue having concerns and problems maintaining their homes after any state of emergency is lifted, unless the economy comes roaring back. And so we need to be mindful of what happens after the state of emergency. And then also, we're calling for a multilingual hotline within the Housing Stabilization Unit. We know that multilingual communication needs to improve here in Montgomery County. Many of you have been talking about that for years, and I particularly want to thank Councilmember Navarro for her thoughtful input on this and her leadership in that regard, making sure that everybody has proper access to all the information, benefits, and services that we have to offer here in Montgomery County. And so as we continue our work of speaking with our constituents and making sure that everybody is safe and healthy, we also know that people need to be housed. And if they can't afford to live in their home, they won't have a home to be safe in. And the last thing we need is more people leaving their homes for whatever reason and going into any of the shelters where we're already trying to take care of those who are experiencing homelessness. And so last point I'll make is that I've been speaking with the administration to work through this, and I believe that we have come to some agreement that there will be federal funds likely to supplement this. It's still being worked out, so this resolution might be amended in the next week or so, depending on some of the federal funds that we're working on right now. But this is a good start to make sure that our residents know that when May 1st comes, June 1st comes, July 1st comes, there will be support for them. And while we're all trying to maintain our health and safety, the last thing we want anybody to worry about is being forced out of their homes. And so I appreciate, again, the unified effort that we on the council are taking to make sure that everybody is safe and secure during this crisis, and look forward to working with you all to deal with this in the weeks and months to come. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedman.
Thank you. I just want to thank Councilmember Glass for taking the lead on this. I had raised emergency rental assistance as part of the initial COVID relief package that ultimately ended up with the $36.5 million package that the council put forward as a body, and in consultation with DHCA and others were asked to hold off for the time being, and there were some wrinkles to work out, and I really appreciate Councilmember Glass as the lead for homeless and vulnerable communities of taking the helm and working really hard and trying to work out some of those issues and recognize the urgency of the challenge with wanting to make sure that it was done in the best possible way. So this is a critical issue for those in our community. It's something that the Fed and HHS committees have been discussing for a while, some of the challenges with the emergency rental assistance. So I appreciate some of the changes that need to move forward, not just for this crisis, but for a program that needs some improvement, and that the staff has been working hard with the council to be able to address some of those challenges. And I think that there is no more important thing that we can do in terms of emergency housing situation than to make sure that we are providing emergency funding for those who desperately need it, so that they can stay housed at a time when we are asking them to stay at home. They need to have a home to stay in that they can afford to live in. So thank you to all colleagues. Thank you to Councilmember Glass, and appreciate that we are now finally moving this forward, something that is desperately needed for our residents.
Thank you. Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you, Mr. President. Very happily support this allocation of funds to, as Councilmember Glass so eloquently stated, a group of our population that is going to desperately be in need, not just over the next month, but over the next several months as we get through this crisis, and really appreciate all the efforts of my colleagues to do everything that we can to address the needs of the most vulnerable among us. I did also want to highlight item number B on the consent calendar and thank our colleagues in the Department of General Services, as well as the Department of Health and Human Services, to work quickly to be able to provide more capacity to address our homeless shelter population. and specifically the funds allocated to expand our ability to house our homeless population. We know right now in particular that our homeless population is just being devastated by this pandemic, and I appreciate all the efforts of our nonprofit providers as well as HHS, who are working tirelessly around the clock to help try and keep these particular residents safe and all of us safe through this public health emergency. So I just wanted to express my appreciation for moving this forward as quickly as it has been moved, and look forward to supporting any other things that may be needed with this specific project. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. Also want to express my appreciation to Councilmember Glass. In reality, just, recapping, appreciate everybody, because definitely this is like a day-to-day, hour-by-hour situation when we are all working so very hard to respond to everything that continues to evolve, and cannot stress enough how important this is. And how critical it's going to be also for us to communicate this as rapidly as possible, so the folks know that this does exist. It is, as I said, quite amazing to participate, and all of you have done this in particular interviews, et cetera, and to go through everything that we are doing. It's heartwarming, but at the same time, it reminds me that we need to do everything to package and push out information in a way that people can keep up, digest it, and take advantage of it. So again, thank you. This complements everything that everybody has been working on thus far, and I'm really happy to support this and anything else that we are collectively doing going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm just going to be very brief. When it comes to the Health and Human Services Homeless Shelter Edition, it's interesting that our great work is actually helping us in a time of a pandemic. We knew that we needed to do this because it was the right thing to do at the time, well before COVID-19, and now this is going to give us additional capacity to be able to do the things that we need to do. So we have to highlight that and understand that the reason that a lot of the positions that we find ourselves in are because of the great work that you guys and the administration working together, all of the department heads do for this county. And so I'm just really proud and able to see us actually be able to reap some of the benefits of something that we did a lot of pre-planning for. So kudos to Department of General Services. We just need to make sure that they finish on time so that we can have that additional capacity to allow our homeless residents to be able to properly distance space and give them that ability to move clients around as necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. I really want to thank Councilmember Glass for taking the initiative to identify these needs and the opportunity to put additional funding towards some of the most vulnerable county residents and their emergency housing needs. Just wanted to add to that the county executive branch has identified a number of ways that our nonprofit housing providers owe funds to the county, on a regular basis for the repayment of loans and other types of agreements. And they have sent us a memo outlining their ability to defer those kinds of payments in the short term, which is helpful. I think there's some additional measures we'll need to take. Our affordable housing providers are often going to be those who, like the providers of market affordable housing, their tenants are often retail sector workers who are, facing a higher level of unemployment or reduced employment. So they're having trouble getting enough revenue from rent to pay off their own financing. So to the extent that the county can defer payment on financing that is owed to the county is very useful, as well as, again, additional measures we may be able to take with the providers themselves to help stabilize them. We are pushing for the federal package the next federal package to have more support for the housing providers. There has not yet been enough, but we've got plenty more work ahead of us in the coming months to ensure that our crucial housing partners are stabilized through this crisis.
Thank you very much. And I, too, would like to thank Councilmember Glass and Councilmember Friedson, and everyone else who's been involved with the idea and the concern for this relief. It's obviously necessary, and it's something that we all will be looking forward to voting on. And with that, we have a motion from Councilmember Navarro and a second from Councilmember Reamer that we approve our consent calendar. All those in favor, please raise your hand. I think I can see everybody. Yes, and that carries unanimously. Thank you very much. The next item that we have is a resolution to appoint the hearing examiner of the Office of Zoning Administrative Hearing in the name of Derek Baumgartner. I need a motion, please.
So moved. Let's appoint Derek Baumgartner as the hearing examiner.
It's been moved by Councilmember
Second.
Reamer. Who seconded? Councilmember Rice. It's been moved by Councilmember Reamer and seconded by Councilmember Rice. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that carries unanimously as well. You know, seeing everybody at the same time is not as easy as one might think, but anyhow, it's fun. Next item that we have is a discussion on the Joint Council/County Executive State Transportation Priority Letter. And we're going to begin, please, with the chair of the T&E Committee, Vice President Hucker.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, everybody. You all know about the priorities letter, but for our global fan base, I'll just remind them we have a requirement in state law that every county needs to send a letter to the governor and the Maryland Department of Transportation to rank our funding priorities for transportation projects that involve the state but are yet unfunded. And this is a process that we do periodically. It takes a fair amount of time and is very much a collaborative process with the county executive always. And this year in particular involved a lot of collaboration with the planning department and with the state delegation as well.
What is this?
So I want to thank especially Montgomery County Director of Transportation, Chris Conklin, and all of his staff for a lot of their work on this. It's an enormous, it might seem like just a letter, but there's a lot of decisions involved in this letter. There's a lot of analysis, and it involves every division of DOT. Also want to thank the Planning Commission and Chair Anderson and their staff for all the work they put into this, and of course, the leadership of our great county delegation, Senator Zucker and Delegate Corman. We do this periodically. There's, as I said, a lot that goes into it, and we all get a lot of feedback from our constituents about what projects should be funded all over the county. This is our formal opportunity to convey that to the governor. The process is especially important this time because this letter is the first one on which this council and this current county executive have collaborated. So there was probably more debate and decision-making than there would be ordinarily. Some of the highlights in this letter include that we moved up the Georgia Avenue improvements in Montgomery Hills to our number 1 project. We moved up Clopper Road improvements to number 2. Both of those communities have been waiting for so many years to get those projects moving ahead, and we're sending a clear signal to the state that they need to act on these. We also worked, we had a very long T&E meeting on this. We were glad to be joined by Councilmember Friedson, who is, as usual, an effective advocate for his communities and in District 1. And we redrafted the interstate program portion of the letter to reflect our values and our priorities on the 495-270 Managed Lanes project to make sure that we were protecting the communities on the western side of the Beltway that could be impacted by that, and insist that we stay within the current right-of-way so those communities, the impacts are mitigated. Transit advocates generally, including advocates particularly for WMATA, for BRT, should be very happy with how we've prioritized many of those projects in this letter and moved them up and elevated them for the state's attention and for the attention from the WMATA board as well. And there are many other good ideas in here as well. I need to thank Dr. Orlin before I turn it over to him because he puts more time into this probably than anybody else, and his packet is very, very thorough. And the chart in particular that shows the differences between this letter and previous years is particularly helpful. So anyway, with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Orland to go through the letter.
Okay, can you hear me? This is new for me. Thank you very much. I will just, Mr. Hucker gave a very good overview and more detail also on the letter. Let me just go read through what the committee's recommendations are specifically, and then Mr. Conklin's going to want to weigh in because I believe there's one item that the county executive would like to see some adjustment to. There are 7 categories in this letter, and the ranks are within each category. And there's also some comments that we want to make sure gets included in the letter. Finally, what I would say before I go through this is the process has been that Mr. Conklin has actually led the train on this. He's developed an original letter back in December. It was reviewed by, again, as Mr. Hucker mentioned, by several of his delegates and senators, also by the planning board. And as a result of that, DOT has recommendations that are somewhat different than what he had in his December letter. And it came to T&E, and T&E has its own version of what it is, which and T&E met in early March to do that. And so what will happen after this meeting is, based on your input, Mr. Conklin's going to rewrite the letter to express what you're saying. So you don't have a final product in front of you. Once he's written the letter, it'll be distributed to each of you for wordsmithing, and hopefully within the next week or so, it'll be able to go to the state. Okay. Again, there's 7 categories. The first category is the Interstate Highway Program, and there basically both the I-270 and I-495 improvements in the traffic relief study are included in as the only priority, if you will. But however, we would make sure to add in the letter that the recent decision by the Managed Lane projects recognizing the first stage includes the American Legion Bridge, the portion of the Beltway west of the I-270 West Spur, and I-270 north to I-370 also include language noting that the widening of I-495, the Beltway in the western segment, will be built within the existing right-of-way, and that in all areas of the project, the needs of local communities will be reflected in the design of the project. And there was unanimous consent on this. In the other state highways category, which is the more complex category of them all because there's so many of them, there are 9 priorities. Mr. Hucker mentioned the top priority is the improvements through Montgomery Hills on Georgia Avenue from Forest Glen Road down to 16th Street. The second is the intersection improvements on Clopper Road in Gaithersburg. This is also was recommended by the city of Gaithersburg as its number 1 priority. And this is reflected as number 2 on this particular list. The importance of this is because of Watkinsville Road interchange being open within the next year, and the additional traffic that will be added to Clopper Road in that section. Number 3 is the widening of Route 355 Frederick Road from Route 27 in Germantown up to Stringtown Road in Clarksburg. Number 4 is a series of work to provide accelerated traffic signal modernization throughout the county. It's a generic ask for funds there to help out in the county's program to do that. The 5th is US 29 safety and capacity improvements on particularly upper US 29 White Oak Fairland area. Number 6 is improvements in the center of Burtonsville on Route 198. Something that's been asked for many, many years. Number 7 is the improvements on Norbeck Road east of Georgia Avenue, just north of Leisure World, for mostly pedestrian and bikeway improvements. Number 8 is the design of the Georgia Avenue Norbeck Road interchange. And number 9 is a Route 108 bypass around Laytonsville. This would actually be a good point before I go through the rest to turn over to Mr. Conklin, because this is the area where I think the county executive has a different recommendation he'd like you to consider. So, Chris, over to you.
Well, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I don't think you can. Oh, here we go. Nice to see all of you virtually. The only change that the executive would like you to consider as a result of the T&E's action and then further input he received from the Olney community was in the initial draft of this letter, the Norbeck Road, Georgia Avenue interchange was listed as the number 5 priority, given that it's a frequent bottleneck for folks folks that are leaving the Rockville area on Route 28 and trying to make their way north and east. It also affects Georgia Avenue northbound. When we had the workshop at the committee on this, we talked about the likelihood of an interchange being funded here as being relatively low, given the high cost of that and the demands on the state program. In further conversation with the county executive, he would like to see this restored to number 5, but to recommend that a new planning study be done for this location to identify whether there are improvements other than an interchange that could relieve the recurring congestion at this. It has been in this letter for a very long time and not advanced. And a lot of the situations around this area have changed with the opening of the ICC, some other shorter term improvements implemented by SHA that have changed those conditions substantially. So he was recommending moving this back to number 5, not changing the order of the projects otherwise, and recommending to the state that they do a fresh alternatives study for this location to see what feasible improvements could be implemented short of an interchange implementation here.
Glenn, you are on mute. Glenn, you're on mute.
Here we are. If I can jump back in. 2 things. First of all, what this would mean is we would change the description of that project to the Maryland 9728 improvements, make it more generic, so that if the planning study indeed shows that a different kind of intersection improvement perhaps could do the job rather than full interchange, that would be included. It also, of course, means that a few other priorities would go down a notch. So if this is moved to number 5, then the US 29 improvements in White Oak and Fairlawn become number 6. The 198 improvements in Burtonsville would go from 6 to 7, and the improvements just north of Leisure World on Route 28 for bike and ped improvements would go from 7 to number 8, and then number 9 would remain the same. 1 through 4 would remain the same. So that's the implication of what the county executive's position is. And again, to remind everybody, this is a joint letter, so there needs to be agreement between the council and the executive. So let the negotiation begin.
Any other comments? Well, and let me first off thank the T&E committee and thank Dr. Orland and everyone else associated with this. This is never an easy thing to do, because exactly what Dr. Orland just said was, if you move something, then something else also has to move, and people get very concerned that they moved up or down on the ladder. And at times that we've told people, you know what, don't worry about it. I think, I don't know if it was my time with the county or if it was certainly my time before with the county. There at one point, I think, and Dr. Olin, you can correct me when I'm wrong here, but I think at one point they said they weren't going to prioritize anything. If you're on the letter, everything was equal or something similar to that. And of course, that didn't work out either, because people said, well, I was listed first and something else was listed second. I do appreciate everything that is being done, and I know that I appreciate the concern about 270 and that we need to stay in the right of way and for 495 as well. But 270 obviously is in the 3rd district, and that's a concern. I think we have to be concerned about 270, though it's not exactly part of this, about the whole cost of the utilities. The WSSC costs would be not borne by the widening, and the people who would be paying for the widening 270, the taxpayers would be paying for that. And I think that's also a concern. And then the whole point about Maryland 98 and 97 near the ICC, the people from Leisure World have been very concerned about that area in general for many, many years, and for pedestrian and vehicular and every type of access. And I think that's very necessary that we look at that. I believe that, and there again, we're talking about this letter, but if you look at what happened for Maryland 9728, and in one area, it's suggested that it be number 7 on the list, but on another area, it would be dropping from number 6 to number 8. And I don't know if that sends the wrong message. And so I am supportive of what the county executive is suggesting. So that would be moved, that area would be moved up to number 5. There's more than one project for that area. but that is where I would like to be. And with that, Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was not aware that the executive was going to advocate for this, but this has been something I have advocated for and sent letters regarding this prioritization. It's something that, you know, these folks in this area of the county have been waiting for quite a while. It is true that the introduction of the ICC, you know, entrance and exit has added to this, and so I do think that we need to, you know, prioritize this a little bit more. I understand, of course, that this letter has particular rankings, yet it's all about the funding and it's all about, you know, how this will be pursued at the state level. But it is important for us to send that message. And I just really believe that we should do whatever we can to put this and give it a little bit more visibility. So with, you know, respectfully, given that I know there are other priorities here and many of them are also in my district, such as this one, I would definitely, you know, would like for us to be able to move this a little bit more consistent with the letters that I have sent my colleagues in the past. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. I appreciate the concerns here. I mean, I think we're trying to balance a wide array of projects around the county. There's no real easy answer, but my understanding is that this would lessen the prioritization that the committee has recommended for the Route 28 ICC area, which is, you know, a major issue. Glenn, can you just explain again what would be the kind of chain reaction if the executive's recommendation were adopted?
Sure. What again it would mean is in this category, other state highways, the 1 through 4 priorities of the committee would remain unchanged. Number 5 would be the Maryland 9728 improvements, we'll call it, rather than interchange. And then the US 29 safety and capacity improvements in White Oak and Fairland would drop from number 5 to number 6. The Route 198 improvements in Burtonsville, widening of 198 in Burtonsville, would go from number 6 to number 7. And the pedestrian and bike improvements along Norbeck Road east of Georgia Avenue, north of Leisure World, between Georgia Avenue and the ICC, would drop from number 7 to number 8. And then number 9 would remain the same, the 108 bypass around Laytonsville.
Okay, well, no easy answers, but I think the committee recommendations seems pretty solid to me.
Thank you, Councilmember Hucker.
Thank you, Mr. President. I agree with the Fed chair. These are all worthy projects, and there's never going to be enough state funding to go around. And in the end, the state will decide what they're willing to fund and what they're not. But having said that, everything that was said about the Olney project is certainly true of East County as well. We have prioritized BRT on 29, and we need to make those improvements that are in the queue. We need to. The folks in Burtonsville have been waiting a very long time for those improvements that are consistent with our Vision Zero goals and our interest in redeveloping Burtonsville, which has waited a long time for adequate amount of attention from the county. And certainly the other project, Leisure World, is worthy as well. And the committee put a lot of time into these recommendations. I think for the marginal benefit of elevating that one project, I would ask folks to resist making that change at this point and overruling the committee's thoughtful recommendations on this.
Thank you, Councilmember Rice.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Being the district council member who represents that other part of Clopper Road, Council President, it's one in which, look, we have so many priorities that are so needed. I couldn't agree more with what Councilmember Navarro said. There's so much need that's throughout the county that it's so hard, and everyone said this, that it's really hard to say one is top priority over another. They're all priorities for us. And it's kind of a tough thing for us to list one over the other when we know they all have tremendous benefits in our community throughout. You know, we just approved development in Germantown. That development a couple weeks ago is right on Clopper Road. It's going to feed right down, and those folks are going to go right down Clopper Road. Hopefully, some of them, as I said, will ride a bike to the MARC station. But if we don't increase MARC service, then they're not going to use the MARC train. So, I mean, it's all connected. That's the other thing. And so it's really hard to pick one over the other and say, oh, this is. But I think overall, as long as we have them listed in our letter, I think it gives people the ability to then start to pick and choose which ones they'll be able to do first. The state will decide which ones are more convenient, what they're getting the best deal on, how they can combine projects together with other things that they may be doing as well. So there's a lot that goes into it. So I'm not as parochial in terms of saying, oh, my project has to be first. I certainly understand and am reasonable from that perspective in terms of that let's do what we need to try and make sure that we can get everything in the letter so that folks can identify what the priorities are and continue to push for additional funding from the state to help support that.
Okay. I have no other speakers. Now, how do we work this? Please someone remind me or tell me, because I don't know that I even knew. Do we vote on this? How does this go forward? I know that we have a recommendation from the committee, but do we actually vote on this, or what is done with this one?
There should be a vote on it so that you so you do go on record with what your priorities are. Again, the final written letter will be crafted by Mr. Conklin, and he'll circulate that to everyone. But in terms of the order of things, it should be by vote of the council. But again, I want to remind everybody, this is one of the few things that comes before you where you don't have the final word. You have a co-equal final word. You and the executive really need to agree. So this is what I meant by negotiation. I mean, first, I think maybe take a vote to see where folks are in terms of the county executive's preference, and then if it's not what he wants, then I think we need to find something that would be acceptable to him, and Mr. Conklin will be his representative at this meeting to do that. Right. So I think you should take a vote first and see where the council is.
So your suggestion is, so I understand, is that we should take a vote on the county executive's recommendation, and then if that is not approved, then we take a vote on the T&E committee's recommendation. Is that your suggestion?
No, I think the first part is correct. If it doesn't pass, then I think we need to find some kind of a middle ground that Mr. Conklin, speaking for the executive, can agree with.
Okay. Councilmember, Vice President Hucker.
I would move the committee's recommendation.
It's been moved. Is there a second? Councilmember Glass is shaking his head. Okay.
Yeah.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the committee recommendation. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Opposed? I can't see everybody, but yes, I can. Thank you. It carries unanimously with the caveat of exactly what Dr. Orland said. And of course, everyone is wanting to make certain that the areas that we are concerned about are on the letter and highlighted. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Could I, at this point, since we don't have agreement with the executive, can I toss out an alternative for you all to consider and see if you're there, which would strictly to flip-flop items 7 and 8, so that the intersection at George Avenue in Norbeck becomes number 7, and the Route 28 improvements north of Leisure Road become number 8, and see if there's approval to that. See if Mr. Conklin's okay with that for the executive.
I don't know entirely how the executive will respond, but whatever you decide is what I'll convey to him. I think that obviously is moving in the direction that he wanted to see, which is a higher priority on this particular project.
Friendly amendment.
Excuse me, Councilmember Hawker.
To me, that sounds like as the maker of the motion, it sounds like a friendly amendment. It's a thoughtful compromise, and we can. I'd move that as an amended alternative.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Carries unanimously, and I think even Dr. Orland voted for that as he was coming up the screen. So thank you very much. So that will be the recommendation that we send over. Thank you.
I will relay that to the executive, and if there's any need for other follow-up, I'll let you know, and hopefully not.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Conklin, for all your hard work on this as well. We know that this was not done easily. The next item that we have is
Mr. Katz,
Yes.
I'm sorry, can I need to go through the rest of page 2.
Okay,
It won't
go
take
ahead.
more
I
than
thought
a
you
couple
were
minutes.
finished, Dr. Orland, but go ahead.
Sorry. This is the rest of the committee's recommendations. Okay, so under the WMATA category, the number 1 priority would be to fund the north entrance of the White Oak Metro Station. And number 2 would be to fund the construction of the Veersmill Road, or actually implementation of the priority corridor network, a Metro extra service on Veersmill Road between Montgomery between Montgomery College and Wheaton. Under bus rapid transit, basically all 5 of the BRT lines that we have programmed, we're basically asking for the state to help in the funding of that. And on the pedestrian bikeway facilities, the orders changed a little bit from 3 years ago. Pedestrian bikeway improvements on state highways, increased funding for that is still number 1. Number 2 would be the bicycle pedestrian priority area improvements, planning, design, and construction. That's risen from number 3 years ago to number 2. Support for bike share program grants would drop from number 2 to number 3. And the construction of the ICC multi-use trail along the ICC would be number 4. Under the commuter rail category, the Boyd's Station expansion would be number 1. And I draw a distinction between this and the county's project. The county's project, which we're reviewing next, actually in the CIP, is to triple the parking at the station and to provide a bus loop. What this particular item is to look at the redesign of the platform itself and ADA accessibility to that platform, which is really more state responsibility. Number 2 is adding midday and off-peak service, including a 3rd track for planning, design, construction, and operations for MARC. Number 3 is station area planning for Shady Grove. There was a master plan station plan there adjacent to the metro station. And finally, number 4 is planning for a new MARC station in the White Flint vicinity, east of where the metro station is. And then one of the comments in the MARC section would be to include language noting the regional importance of connecting MARC and the Virginia Railway Express service. I also did mention back under the BRT, we want to make sure there's language in the letter which would increase, note the importance of increasing park and ride in Burtonsville to serve Montgomery and Howard counties and to continue to pursue means of providing transit priority to that BRT line on the White Oak to Silver Springs section of US 29. And then finally, under the local operating transit support category, the number 1 would be funding support for electric charging stations at bus depots. That's limited right now. And the number 2 would be to ask for funding to help extend the 355 Rod-On Extra service from its northern terminus now, which is Lake Forest Mall, up to Germantown, and extend it to the south from where it ends now at Medical Center to Bethesda. And thank you. That concludes the committee's recommendations.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just wanted to express appreciation for this very thoughtful and comprehensive letter. I am pleased with the outcome for the Olney community, and I'm also just very the work of the T&E committee. I have to be reminded of the economic development platform that we adopted. Transportation is a major pillar of that particular platform. And I think when you look at the totality of this letter, it does reflect many of the policy decisions that we have made, as well as the investments that we have made as we continue to move forward with ensuring that we can get to a place where transit makes sense, whether there is connectivity, when we talk about networks, and prioritizing also those areas of the county where maybe there's not a lot of transit, but they also have concerns with issues of congestion and safety. And so it is quite comprehensive. It's a big county. But I think when I read through this entire letter, it does remind me of how important our work has been, how critical to move forward certain goals when it comes to transportation in general. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Orland, do we need to vote on the rest of the statement, or is the one vote satisfactory?
I suppose if that's the intent of the council, that's fine. If you feel like you've done that already, then okay. If you want to take another quick vote, it wouldn't hurt.
Well, thank you for the King Solomon-like answer. Would anyone like to make a motion, please, on Councilmember Hucker, please?
I'll move the committee recommendations on the full letter.
Second.
And it's been seconded the motion was made by Councilmember Vice President Hucker, seconded by Councilmember Rice. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous as well. Thank you very much.
And what I'll report is that, again, under the other state highway category, it's not what T&E originally recommended, but it's now flipping items 7 and 8. But I understand that's what the council wants to do. Okay.
Thank you.
We're done.
Yep. Thank you very much. Next, we're going to move to a work session for FY 21 through 26, the Capital Improvements Program, the CIP, as government calls it. And the first item that we have is transportation, and that happens to come under the T&E committee. And Vice President Hucker, did you have a thought on that?
A couple quick thoughts, Mr. President. Thank you. Thankfully, the T&E committee had some time to go through the transportation CIP before the virus changed all of our meeting practices. The T&E committee found a lot of merits to many of the county executive's recommendations, but we differed on several topics. We voted to keep the construction of Observation Drive extended on track. We've been very focused on the long unmet need of the Up County, and that's a very important project there. We added construction funds to the Dale Drive shared use path. We're committed to our Vision Zero initiative, and there's more people out walking than ever, and they need to be able to walk safely on Dale Drive. Both of those communities have waited a long time for those projects. The committee also voted to reevaluate this cost and the scope of many of our bikeway projects, given our constrained fiscal situation, and to try to assess what the user profile of each of those projects is, so we can make better decisions in the future. We certainly want safe facilities that encourage multimodality, but we also want to avoid redundancies and unnecessary expense, so we could free up funds for all the worthy projects that we have. We're also going to be discussing the bus rapid transit elements of the CIP, including the Capitol Crescent Trail tunnel, in the coming weeks during the reconciliation process. We had originally planned to do a separate committee work session on those two topics, but the ongoing public health crisis disrupted that schedule. Those are my opening comments to sort of frame the discussion, and then I'll turn it over to Dr. Orland to get into the projects in more detail. But I'm grateful to all the members of the committee for all the work that's already gone into this, and again to Dr. Orland and to Director Conklin and all his staff.
Thank you very much. Dr. Orland.
Yes, hi. Okay, here we go. Just a summary, the CIP that the Transportation Committee T&E Committee has taken up so far has increased the amount of money that would go to transportation by about $53 million over what the executive had recommended. But that's about $53 million less than what was the approved CIP. So it's still down from what it was in the 19 to 24 CIP. And we will be covering everything that in the transportation CIP except the CCT, the Capitol Crescent Trail tunnel issue, the BRT projects, the ride-on bus fleet project, and the parking lot district projects, which we'll take out up on April 30th, a week from Thursday. I'll just go through very quickly. Excuse me. I'll just go through each project, not describing them. seem to have all amphibians in my throat this morning. There we go. And see if there's anybody having any questions about them, and otherwise treat it like a consent calendar type of thing. And I'll point out where there was split votes on the committee. Most of them were unanimous, however. Under the bridge projects, there were no change to the Beach Drive Bridge Preservation Program, Brighton Dam Road Bridge, and Dennis Avenue Bridge replacement projects. There are no changes from this CIP to the last one. Under bridge design, the executive is recommending a major increase in funding. T&E committee agreed with that. Bridge renovation, same thing. Again, a major increase. The T&E committee agreed with that. There were 3 projects which are new bridge projects: Brink Road, Garrett Park Road Bridge, and Mouth Monoxie Road Bridge, all of which the executive is newly recommending for funding, and the committee agreed with those. The Dorsey Mill Road Bridge in Germantown, the executives recommend delaying it, and the committee agreed with that. The Glen Mill Road Bridge is another one which is a new project which the T&E committee is agreeing with unanimously. Under our highway maintenance program projects, universal agreement on permanent patching residential rural roads, residential and rural road rehabilitation, resurfacing park roads and bridge improvements, resurfacing primary arterial, salt storage facility, and street tree preservation. We'll be coming back actually to street tree preservation on April 30th because the executive has a different recommendation for that now. But for now, it was to approve what the committee, what the recommendation that the executive made back in January. And under resurfacing residential roads, the executive recommended a large increase. The committee recommended approval for now, subject to reconciliation. Same thing's true with the sidewalk and curb replacement project. Concurrence for now, subject to reconciliation. On the road projects, there are about 10 of them, which really no change, and they're listed on page 7. I won't read them all. There are a couple projects which no longer appear in the CIP, in the recommended CIP, but when the approved one, they don't have any funding, and the committee is asking for DOT to spend the next 2 years looking at the scope of these projects. One is highway noise abatement, which is the program that the county would build noise walls along county roads. And the other is the dedicated but unmaintained roads project, which the county, with people living along these roads, would participate to upgrading them so they could be included for county maintenance. We are looking for over the next 2 years, DOT to reevaluate whether the criteria for these programs should be revised or to scrap the programs altogether. And Montrose Parkway East, just an update. You might recall last year the executive recommended cutting out the project, but leaving $1 million to study less costly options. That study is underway. Hopefully there'll be results this summer that T&E can get a report on this summer, early fall. Bethesda CBD streetscaping, this was a split vote. My recommendation had been to delete the project entirely from the CIP. Councilmembers Glass and Hucker concur with that. Councilmember Reamer concurs with the executive's recommendation to merely delay it. Again, this project's been delayed for the last 20 years. Observation Drive extended. Mr. Hucker mentioned this. The executive had recommended delaying design by 1 year and completion by 3 years. The committee's recommendation is not to delay it. So we'll stay on the same schedule as in the approved CIP. Subdivision roads participation basically is concurring with the executive, with the T&E committee's recommending. For traffic engineering projects, there are 6 of them. There's really just no change, and the committee didn't really discuss, so they agreed with the executive. The intersection spot improvements program, the executive is recommending increasing the 6-year expenditure by about 36%, and would add several intersection improvements to the program, and the committee unanimously agreed with that. The pedestrian safety program agreed with an increase of about 75% in the funding in this program. The committee unanimously agreed with that. Street lighting program, again, there was a change in that a program to replace light fixtures with LED has been completed, is being completed now, and so the programming for this project has been reduced, but only because a major portion of it was just completed. Committee agreed with that. And the White Flint Traffic Analysis and Mitigation Project, the committee agreed with that. Under mass transit, there were no changes to the Bethesda Metro Station South Entrance, bus stop improvements to intelligent transit system projects. The Boyd's Transit Center is one where the executive had recommended funding. Again, I mentioned this a bit earlier in the last item. The tripling of parking and the adding of a bus loop at the Boyd Station, and he would have it completed by FY25. The committee wanted it done sooner, so they approved the recommending approval of the schedule on page 12, which would have it finished in FY24, a year sooner. Mr. Rice, in a separate letter, had recommended that it be accelerated. On the Purple Line project, the executive is recommending revising the payback to the state for our portion of the Purple Line costs by about $5 million for FY22 to FY23. The committee agreed with that, and to add language on the text of the PDF saying that revenue service on the Purple Line in Montgomery County is scheduled to begin in 2023. The White Flint Metro Station access improvements, this was money that had been in the previous CIP set aside for a placeholder for planning for the White Flint North Entrance project. The executive recommended instead using that money to do certain small projects right around the metro station, and the committee agreed with that. However, the committee did decide by a 2-to-1 vote to include funds, half the funds, for the cost of the White Flint Metro Station Northern Entrance. That was voting in favor of that were Councilmembers Glass and Reamer. Councilmember Hucker concurred with the executive and council staff not program those funds. That was essentially premature at that time. Then under pedestrian facilities and bikeways, there are 8 projects where there's no change. Under the Bethesda Bikeway Pedestrian Facilities Project, we want to just highlight the fact that the surface trail for the Capitol Crescent Trail, which is part of this PDF, will be largely finished this summer. Another piece will be finished next summer, but well in advance of when the Purple Line will open. The Bowie Mill Road Bikeway, the new project, it's finished facility planning. The committee is recommending unanimously that it be programmed to be completed, actually starting design in fiscal year 23 and be completed in the summer of 2028. In the BIPA projects, the Bicycle Pedestrian Priority Area projects, there are several changes. In aggregate, the funding will be increased by about 16%. The T&E committee recommend concurring with the executive on those. In the Bikeway program minor projects, the committee recommended the 6-year funding be increased by about 6%, particularly a bike path along Lay Hill Road from Park Vista Drive to Ballman Drive near the ICC interchange. The committee unanimously agreed with that. The Bradley Boulevard improvements, the committee recommended concurring with the executive to which actually for this year, we keep the project on schedule, except that the phase 2 of this project, which is the hiker-biker path on the northeast side of Bradley Boulevard, that be completed in FY27. So the rest of the project, which is a sidewalk along the southwest side, as well as bike lanes on Bradley Boulevard and other improvements there, would happen by FY26. Another new project, the Dale Drive Shared Use Path and Safety Improvements, which I'm sure you've heard a lot about. The executive had not recommended including it in the CIP, as he hadn't done for the Bowie Mill Bikeway either. But anyway, the committee's recommendation is to start design next year, FY21, and have it completed in FY26. The Falls Road East Side Hiker-Biker Path is a project that's been in the CIP for many, many years without really progressing. And there's been comments that you received at the hearings that maybe its design is out of date. The committee recommended unanimously continuing to show the funding for that for design in fiscal years 21 and 22, but to delete the funds for construction within the 6-year period, and to revise the project's name to Falls Road Bikeway and Pedestrian Facility. The idea here is that once the project is this design is refreshed, it may be a different scope of the project than we have now at a different cost. The Goldsboro Road Sidewalk Bikeway, the executive recommended delaying it by 2 years. The committee's recommendation ultimately was delay it by 1 year. The Good Hope Road Sidewalk Project has the executive recommended changing the scope of the project from a sidewalk to a bike path at the request of the planning board. And the committee agreed with that. Part of the executive's recommendation, though, was because the project needed to be redesigned to make this a bike path rather than a sidewalk, it delayed the completion by 1 year. So it's now going to be completed in FY23. The Life Science Center Loop Trail, this is one of the items which you recall in discussion about the Great Seneca Science Corridor is one of the triggers for stage 2 of the Great Seneca Science Corridor being able to go forward. The committee's recommendation is to fund it's the budget design in FY21 and 22 with GO bonds, but then show land acquisition and construction in fiscal years 23 and 25 funded with contributions. The hope here is that as development is approved in the Great Seneca Science Corridor, that one of the conditions will be that they will chip in the cost of dedicating the land and constructing this trail. The MacArthur Boulevard Bikeway Project, the executive had recommended a 2-year delay, and similar to Goldsboro Road, the committee compromised with a 1-year delay. The Route 55 Clarksburg Shared Use Path, the committee recommended concurring with the executive. The cost is actually gone down here, so which is really good news. Going down by 25%. The Metropolitan Branch Trail, unfortunately, is continuing to be delayed. This is the trail from the Silver Spring Metro Station down to Tacoma Park campus of Montgomery College, and it's been delayed because of not being able to get approvals from CSX and Montgomery Preservation Inc. and Maryland Historic Trust. DOT recently reported it's made progress with WMATA and with CSX, but negotiations with MPI and Maryland Historic Trust are still ongoing. So that ends up being a delay of a couple of years again. Seven Locks Bikeway and safety improvements, similar to the Falls Road one, rather than proceeding with the project as is, very, very expensive project over 3 phases, the committee recommended essentially sending it back to facility planning to refresh the conceptual design, adding $500,000 in that project for that, and show the remaining cost of phase 1 of that project, which is from Montrose Road down to Tuckerman Lane, in the beyond 6 years category as a placeholder. And add in the fiscal note that the total cost of all 3 phases is about $70 million. The sidewalk program minor projects, they recommend concurring with the executive. There's actually a 24% increase there. And then finally, facility planning and transportation. The executive recommended adding several new studies to the program. See at the bottom of page 23. The committee basically ended up agreeing unanimously with the executive on his recommendations, including what I mentioned earlier, the council's recommendation to add $500,000 to refresh the conceptual design of the Seven Locks project. And that is it. So if there are any questions about any of those projects or any other discussion, this would be the time.
You ran out of things to say right when you lost your voice, Dr. Worley. Councilmember Hucker, Vice President Hucker.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just real quickly, that's a great summary, Glenn. Thank you for everybody watching us. We just dealt with the priorities letter, of course, deals with the projects that are funded or we aspire to be funded by the state. These are all locally funded projects on our local highways. There are many individual, very worthy projects throughout this that Dr. Orla just went through, and there's much more in the packet. I just want to draw attention countywide to sort of 2 themes real quickly that I left out. One is, we've all unanimously made a big commitment to Vision Zero, to driving down our pedestrian deaths. In this environment, we have more people out walking than ever, and I'm sure all of us are as committed to that as we ever have been. And this packet and this set of decisions reflects that. we just went through a lot very quickly, but I would just call your attention to, for example, the traffic engineering program, where intersection improvement, they don't all sound like, at first glance, pedestrian safety improvements, but I want you to pick up on that theme. Intersection improvements are up 36%. That's not just intersection improvement to make cars move more quickly through intersections. That's often to make cars move more slowly and include enhancements for pedestrians at intersections, which are often too dangerous all across the county. The pedestrian safety sub-budget under traffic engineering is up 75%, and street lighting is down, which you would think of as, why is it down? That's a pedestrian safety need as well. It's down because we've been investing for years in upgrading all our street lighting to LEDs to save money and meet our climate goals. And we are now finishing in this fiscal year 26,000 streetlight replacements to LED fixtures. So that is a great thing for the environment. It's a good thing for our budget as well, and it's a good thing for our cars and bikes and pedestrians. I also there's a lot to love in this whole budget, this CIP, for cyclists and pedestrians and people who like them, whether that's you or not. The Bethesda bikeways has a strong enhancement. The BIPAs, which had been cut out of previous CIPs and restored by the council, they're actually up 15% for bicycle and pedestrian improvements all across the county in our urban areas. And the bikeway projects is up as well. So I just wanted to call attention to those overall themes, because aside from the merits of the individual projects, I think this CIP and the T&E committee's recommendations reflect our overall council-wide priorities that we've set and reinforced. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. Terrific summary by the committee chair. So I also wanted to just draw attention to many of the different elements. I'm, of course, very excited about the BIPA program. So many of our aging urban areas, a lot of them in the Purple Line walk sheds, but others like Veers Mill and Randolph Road are just, they were built with a different era in mind. Now there are so many people who live in those areas, but the infrastructure hasn't changed in 30, 40 years. So these programs will enable the county to prioritize funding for pedestrian and bike improvements to make safety treatments. And they're often much more affordable than the mega projects that we're struggling to fund. The $70 million, shared use path alongside of an arterial road is difficult, but often you can serve a lot of people with just several $1 million or even less in a smaller treatment, but where the density of use is really significant. So that program, I think, has been very successful, and as the committee chair explained, it has been, for years it was defunded by the executive branch, and the council had to work really hard to restore the funding, and we always did. And this is, I think, the first budget where we haven't had to actually just restore the funding. So last year we did, but this year we didn't. So that is a big step forward, I think, and I hope. A few other points I wanted to mention. I really am pleased with the recommendation around Observation Drive. I think we need to keep that commitment. It is a good way for us to provide an improved transit connection to Clarksburg, as well as bike access and, of course, additional road access. Clarksburg does need transportation of all forms, all modes. So it's not it's an expensive item, but it's needed, and I'm glad that's in there. The Boyd's Transit Center was really pleased to support that. I want to thank Councilmember Rice, of course, for his advocacy there. Providing, there's a lot of folks in that region who will like to take the mark. Boy, it sounds like a comment from another lifetime ago, commuting into work. Wow, like, who does that anymore? But some people do. But in any event, a lot of folks really have expressed over the years their desire to take the mark, but parking lots are full. There hasn't been adequate bus service or shuttle service to the station. So we have this vision of creating more parking and a better bus system, bus loop. And so I'm glad we could accelerate that. The Bowie Mill Bikeway, same for the Olney community. And then finally, of course, the White Flint North Metro. I know we are in for big commitments to White Flint, but we have to be. That is hopefully the next urban center in that corridor that will take off. As we want Silver Spring to take off and Wheaton, we want White Flint to take off. And we need to make some infrastructure investments in order to make that possible. So, my colleagues will remember my 5-point economic plan that I put forward maybe about 6 or 8 months ago. One of the key elements for me has always been retrofitting the White Flint landscape to be a more urbanized context. And so I'm pleased the executive has recommended more funding for that type of expenditure in this budget, but the metro entrance is a key element for us to create an urban center. And the employers are looking for it, the residents are looking for it. So putting the funding on the table is going to make something more possible. Councilmember Friedson, I'm sure will make comments here, but we've been in dialogue with WMATA, and anyway, there's lots to say there, but I would just say that for us to show funding is essential to get this project moving forward, and we've got to get it done as fast as possible. So thank you very much. Appreciate the recommendation, and I'm pleased to support it.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the T&E committee for their thoughtful deliberation, for allowing me to join in. Councilmember Rice also joined in to advocate for some of his important projects that have already been referenced, and I certainly was there to advocate for a number of projects in District 1. It was a deliberative and thoughtful and long committee session, and so I appreciate colleagues for that. A couple things. I want to start where Councilmember Reamer left off, which is the White Flint metro entrance. I absolutely continue to believe that the Pike District is ground zero for the county's economic development strategy, and that we need to be investing in the opportunities for growth in the areas of significant potential. And what we do there is emblematic of what we can do everywhere in the county, and creates an east-west connection and a north-south connection, and really is absolutely critical to Rockville, to north of Rockville, up the 270 corridor, to Wheaton, and to connecting into Bethesda. I just think it's absolutely critical. Really appreciate the majority of the committee that stepped up to fund half. Councilmember Reamer and I have been in frequent conversations, including a conversation with the general manager of WMATA, Mr. Wiedefeld, discussing the possibility that we have heard consistently, and the likelihood in the current environment. And the bottom line is, we don't have a plan yet of how WMATA would or will fund this, and so the county needs to step up, and we need to put the pressure on with our own commitment to get WMATA to join us in funding this priority. It's a core tenet of realizing the White Flint plan and to actualizing the vision of urbanizing suburban surface parking lots and strip centers into the urban community that we see as the not just the future, but the current momentum of the economic strategy for Montgomery County. And I really appreciate the commitment and leadership there. Appreciate the committee keeping Bradley Boulevard on its new schedule, but making sure that that isn't further delayed. It's Tier 1 in the bike master plan, a critical project, very important to the community. And I think it's critical as you go just outside the urban cores throughout the county, making sure that we have connectivity of that last mile and 2 miles to prevent people from needing to get in their cars in the first place is critical to our Vision Zero goals and our environmental and economic goals as well. So I appreciate that. I appreciate Goldsboro, the compromise that was reached there, which is part of the Transportation Planning Board priority, connects us in with our regional partner into DC. Councilmember Glass noted the TPP and the regional connectivity in that committee session, which I appreciate. And I think that was an important compromise to not delay that 2 years, but only 1 year to move that forward, which is important. And then, I would be remiss, however, if I didn't mention the Seven Locks and Falls Road projects. These, as were mentioned, have been long-standing projects, long-standing commitments that have been promised to the community. And I think that when we continuously delay and push off projects in capital budgets, we risk eroding public trust and confidence in local government's willingness and ability to fulfill its commitments. And it really concerns me that we continue to delay these projects. It's delay after delay after delay for decades in the making. And it's a huge challenge and frustration for me. And just, in particular on the Seven Locks piece, I know a couple things that I noted during the committee session, but one is the number of schools and religious institutions that have heavy traffic, including a school that's largely publicly funded for children with special needs, and a community of worshipers that require walking. And so it is a heavily trafficked pedestrian area in Tier 1. And then Tier 2, between Tuckerman and Bradley Boulevard, there is one of the oldest and most storied historically black communities, the Scotland community, and a church, a historically black church and of significant historical significance, many in that community that require public transportation and desperately needed sidewalks that don't exist there, that put them at risk for their lives on a daily basis. And so I just would be remiss if I didn't both raise the importance of the projects, but also the broader point of as we add new projects into CIPs year after year and continuously delay projects that are part of the capital budget, we run the risk of the public not believing us when we make commitments and say that we're going to fund projects. And so I appreciate the thoughtful work of the committee, appreciate the commitment of colleagues, and look forward to pushing forward with the projects that have been funded. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I also wanted to highlight the importance of all the bicycle improvements, the bikeways projects that have been included. Very important to the Wheaton CBD, also to the Bearsmill Randolph Road, the corridor. You guys are making, I'm sorry, I apologize. These types of improvements are really important. I think it was highlighted earlier that for Vision Zero, I'm going to have to come back to this item. Thank you. I just can't stop laughing right now. So.
Okay, well, we will call on you right after Councilmember Rice. Councilmember Rice.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Let me just say that I really want to say thank you. This is just a great day. When we missed the final opportunity for us to come together as a group to all say how important all of these projects are and what kind of impact they're going to have on the community, it's just tremendous. I mean, when you think about it, and I really want to thank both Councilmember Reamer as well as all of the T&E who are so understanding and really kind of bringing together how it is that we are trying to address transportation as a whole. And I really want to say that the comments that were made by Council Vice President Hucker when it comes to, excuse me, I'm getting choked up just like Dr. Orland. When it comes to what it is and what this means for us, it's just incredibly important. It really is. So I just really wanted to say thank you as a whole. Really.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro, would you like to speak next, or would you like to wait?
Yes, I'd like to speak now. So I think that it is important to recognize that this, again, is very comprehensive. I will have to say that the issue with the White Flint entrance, it's something that we do need to discuss and come to some consensus. I agree that when it comes to economic development, and we've had these conversations time and time again, we have to move forward with some very bold approaches because it is just critical to our shared goals of ensuring that Montgomery County has a robust and very aggressive economic development strategy. But I hope that we can also have a little bit of conversation, because we can't ignore the fact that the executive has expressed some other kinds of approaches. We have not received anything from him, so it's very difficult to to understand what that's going to mean. But in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, we're all trying to figure out, what do these investments mean in light of this new reality. I'm of the opinion that we do need to move forward. I just hope that as we are having this conversation that we can share. I'm interested in understanding how all of this interacts with what the executive has proposed or what he has said he wants to propose, as well as the other kinds of expenditures that we have, given that we understand that the situation is tight in terms of fiscal resources, but at the same time, again, figuring out how to move forward. I mentioned both Councilmember Reamer and Friedson say that they've had conversations with Mr. Whitfield, and just would like to understand better what is the totality of what we're trying to do, so that we all make an informed decision here regarding this particular item. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you, Mr. President. I really do want to acknowledge and thank my colleagues in the T&E committee, and I'm appreciative that they had the time before all of this happened to thoroughly go through these recommendations. And when you take a step back and look at those recommendations, I'm struck by the balance of infrastructure, mass transit, roads, pedestrian safety, and really appreciate the thoughtful and deliberative manner in which they went about their work. And also acknowledge that there is an opportunity moving forward before us. I know the federal government is deliberating on different spending packages to help us as we get through what will likely be a very difficult and deep recession. And I think a new deal is in order. And a lot of these projects, a lot of these infrastructure and road projects, which we're doing our best through county funds and state funds to be able to address, are worthy of federal investment. And so as we move forward, I know our federal delegation is working tirelessly on our behalf before Congress, but this does present a really significant opportunity for us to be able to expand these projects and meet the demand that's out there. So thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to really pick up where Councilmember Albornoz just left off, that I think my colleagues in the T&E committee did a really good job of balancing all the needs throughout the county, all the needs, recognizing that there need to be some roadway improvements up in Germantown and Clarksburg, and there need to be some bicycle and pedestrian improvements throughout the county, but then other needs from Bethesda to Burtonsville and Tacoma Park, Silver Spring. And so the other aspect that I really appreciated in the deliberative conversations was recognizing while most, if not all, of the projects are important, there's a cost associated with all of them. And now, even more so than ever, as has been mentioned, we'll need to figure out our budget and bonding moving forward. But there were some cost-benefit analyses that we were undertaking as we developed this, because some projects, while really important and useful for the community, cost a lot more money per item than some others. And so again, good teamwork, good balance, good geographic representation of all these projects. And I really appreciate also the district council members weighing in and helping make these decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. And I too would like to literally join the chorus on this to thank everyone for their hard work. And there again, this is something that's not easy, but we need to work together, and we need to make certain that all of our priorities, from Vision Zero to moving to our transportation issues, that they're all on the list and all being concerned, that remind each other that we're so very concerned about them. And with that, I guess there's no other speakers. So do we just need a, by acclamation? I mean, where are we on this one, Dr. Orland?
Just take a vote on the committee's recommendations, and if you concur with them, and that's true, that's your tentative decision.
Okay. Councilmember Hucker, Vice President Hucker is making a motion. Is there a second? Someone want to nod their head? Yes, Councilmember Glass is nodding his head. It's been moved by Council Vice President Hucker and seconded by Councilmember Glass. All those in favor, please raise their hand. And that's unanimous. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next item that we have is Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission, the WSSC Water, and a person by the name of Vice President Hucker will be discussing this.
Thank you, Mr. President. The T&E committee took up WSSC's 6-year CIP as well before the crisis hit. This, as I think everyone knows, is a bi-county capital budget. Thankfully, it proposes a modest 1.6% increase in the previous 6-year CIP funding, which totaled $3.7 billion. It's hard to control your capital costs anytime in this area, given the rapidly aging infrastructure of WSSC. It's particularly hard in for any project, given the rising cost of construction these days. But that's where they are, and I think it's good news for everybody that the increase is held down to 1.6%. The CIP will be revisited by the committee during the consideration of their operating budget, especially once we know the customer volumetric rates under their new rate structure, as we will take that up in a few months. I do want to thank the General Manager, Carla Reed, all the commissioners that worked with us collaboratively, and WSSC's staff for answering all our questions throughout the process and working with us. And I certainly want to thank Mr. Levchenko for his, as usual, very thorough and helpful packet. So with that, Mr. President, I'll turn it over to Mr. Levchenko with your permission.
Please, Mr. Levchenko.
The cover sheet. Let's see, am I muted?
No, you are one. We can hear you.
Okay. I'm referring to the cover sheet for agenda item number 6. And we do have several folks from WSSC here, including Joe Beach, Deputy Director of Administration, who's actually filling in for General Manager Carla Reed. We have Patricia Callahan, the Chief Financial Officer, and we have Mark Brackett, the CIP Budget Section Manager from WSSC. So they can, between them, they can probably answer any questions you have regarding any of these projects. As Committee Chair Hucker mentioned, the 6-year proposed total is $3.7 billion. This includes the CIP as well as all other bond-funded projects that are not technically considered CIP from the state's definition. So we try to be comparing apples to apples. Last year, this year, all the bond-funded work. There are 4 new projects in the request this year. They're noted in the packet on, let's see, page 7. I'll note a couple of the more notable ones. There's a regional water supply resiliency study, which would be a regional effort. The council members may be familiar with some ongoing work in this area, looking at long-term water supply needs in the region. And this would be an attempt to secure some federal funds for some significant regional planning work in coordination with the Council of Governments and the Potomac River Basin intermunicipal or inter-state commission. So that's noted in here, but it would be supported with federal money. There's also a new request or a new project for an expansion of WSSC's laboratory division building to address capacity issues. In addition to the fact that it's aging, it also is having to send out a lot of its critical lab work because of capacity concerns. And the committee was supportive of that project. There's also a developer-funded project which adds to the total but does not add to the rate impact. Going a little further down, as Councilmember Committee Chair Hucker mentioned, it's a relatively minor increase in the overall CIP. However, within that, you have some significant cost increases and decreases. One major area of WSSC is the Blue Plains projects. This is the WSSC share of the capital costs for DC Water's Blue Plains plant. And those costs are up actually about $75 million over the 6 years, mainly because the plant, although it's had a lot of upgrades the last decade to deal with biosolids and also with its enhanced nutrient reduction requirements, the plant itself is so big and massive that there's always rehab work going on and rehab work that has to begin. And that's what we're seeing in this project over the next 6 years. There's also an increase in the large diameter water pipe rehabilitation project, about $53 million. This has been a high priority of both counties for over a decade. Prior councils had to deal with significant flooding issues from when we had catastrophic pre-stressed concrete cylinder pipe failures. And this project was increased substantially to deal with that. And they are still ramping this project up over time. On the one other significant increase, the Potomac Water Filtration Plant Consent Decree Program has a $42 million increase in it over the 6 years. This is based on the most recent scope of work to meet the consent decree requirements. The council discussed this in detail a couple of years ago when the consent decree was put in place. There's both short-term and long-term requirements in that consent decree. The short-term requirements have been moving along. The long-term requirements required significant study to determine how to eliminate putting solids back into the river, even in high flood, high storm type events. And that's really where the cost comes in, is dealing with it during those unusual, very significant rain events. On the cost decrease side, both the water reconstruction program and the sewer reconstruction program are showing decreases. And this is for a couple of reasons. On the water side, they are actually reducing the number of miles they're doing for the second year in a row. So that's affecting the 6-year total. Mainly because they're looking at new technologies to do reconstruction work smarter. And rather than just focusing on trying to do a minimum number of miles, trying to find those areas that are most likely to be in need of reconstruction and focusing on those. And WSSC can certainly speak to those technologies. They talked to the committee about that in the committee session. It's very exciting work. And it does allow at least a pause in some of the work they were doing here, and that's why we're seeing some of that decrease. On the sewer side, they're looking at about a consistent 20 miles per year of sewer reconstruction work, but WSSC has actually seen some reduction in costs here, and that's reflected in that project. Another big project ongoing for a number of years is the trunk sewer reconstruction program. To address the sanitary sewer overflow consent decree. It's a billion-dollar project essentially, but it is winding down, and the costs are starting to work their way through the CIP, and so we're getting to more of a steady state near the end of the CIP process, and that's allowing this project to also show some cost reductions. Some other projects of interest, the Piscataway Bioenergy Project is moving forward. There's some significant site work underway. That's perhaps, if not the biggest, one of the most important projects in the CIP to help WSSC address its long-term solution for its biosolids. Ultimately, there'll be a plant there that is very similar to the plant that exists at DC Water that deals with DC Water's biosolids. And it will also create clean energy as part of that, and a Class A biosolids product that would be much easier to market and avoid the significant regulatory issues with regard to land application. Another major project, their advanced metering infrastructure project, is also moving forward within the CIP. WSSC can provide an update on the status of that. My understanding, it had the planning work, at least this past spring, has been affected by the current emergency we're in, but they're not showing a change in the project schedule for this project or any other projects in the CIP at this time. Certainly, if it's an issue over the next few months, we may have to revisit the CIP. But at this time, there's no changes in the CIP before the council today related to the current emergency. Some other issues of interest. The council did approve an amendment to the WSSC Water CIP earlier this month to allow the purchase of an adjacent building to their headquarters. We had a significant discussion about that in the T&E committee at the same time as the CIP, and the council later did approve that on March 31st. The committee also had a joint meeting with its TIEE counterpart in Prince George's and discussed two main issues. First, the I-495 270 road widening issue. And that was taken up because of some significant cost estimates for WSSC infrastructure related to that. And Committee Chair Hucker can certainly speak to that issue. And I believe a joint letter was drafted from both councils. I don't know the status of that, but Mr. Hucker could update us on that. But the main thing was to bring that issue to the attention of the state and make sure that costs associated with relocation of WSSC infrastructure could be addressed within the broader contracting process and concessioner process for that. One final issue I'll note is I believe both council members Reamer and Mr. Hucker have asked WSSC to look at their system development charge credit process in light of issues regarding a Silver Spring hotel project that had a significant requirement for improving the sewer infrastructure in that area. And there are issues with regard to the payback of that over time and the guaranteed nature of that and the equity or fairness of requiring such a large investment up front with a long repayment period over time. General Manager Reed agreed to take another look at that. We don't have any information prepared today regarding that issue, but that is one we can bring back after budget. With that, I'll just note that the committee did unanimously recommend approval of the WSSC CIP as proposed by WSSC and, by the way, as recommended by the county executive as well. With that, I'll leave it to questions for council members. And as I mentioned, we do have WSSC staff here to answer questions as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Levchenko. Vice President Hucker, did you have anything else to add?
Well, just since, thank you very much for the both the packet and all your work on this and the thorough update, Keith. I didn't say anything about the WSSC, the risk to WSSC ratepayers that is associated with the Managed Lanes project. And many of you are familiar with this, the public may not be, but it came to my attention a couple months ago that there was a 1958 MOU signed between WSSC and the predecessor of the State Highway Administration that puts all the costs of utility relocation in the right-of-way owned by State Highway on the ratepayers of the WSSC utility. So I engaged in some back and forth with WSSC leadership. They had been conducting a cost estimate and conveying their concern about that to state officials. I wanted to make sure that the public and you all became aware of this in an organized way. So we called that joint hearing with our counterparts in Prince George's and walked through the slide deck that is in Mr. Levchenko's packet. And the bottom line is the cost could be potentially as high as $2 billion to WSSC ratepayers. I personally think that that should not be borne by ratepayers. That should be borne by the concessionaire of the project, and certainly the public has a right to know about it. The governor and MDOT have, of course, repeatedly said that there'd be no cost to the general public associated with this project, but only to toll users, to drivers on the managed lane project paying through the tolls. This is sort of a horse of a different color and a big disclosure. So it's good that it's out in public now. We have engaged, and I know WSSC has been since 2018 talking to MDOT about this. And thank you to all of you who have signed the letter that we circulated, making clear to WSSC that we're not interested in approving a rate increase associated with cost of utility relocation from this project. That letter that Mr. Levchenko referred to has been sent over to Prince George's County Council. Chair Turner has added it to their council agenda for this week, and we expect to hear back very soon. The four of them who attended our joint bi-county hearing on this were all very supportive of protecting ratepayers as well, as you might imagine, and we expect to have a sign-on to that joint letter back from Prince George's County very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for all your hard work on that one. This really is, I guess no one remembered that this could be a possibility. I mean, we were concerned, obviously, about 270 and the entire situation with it, but this one, the several $1 billion is obviously a great concern. And with that, Councilmember Reamer, please.
Thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to make 3 quick points. First, thanks to the committee chair for bringing forward the discussion about the impact on WSSC, the potential impact on WSSC ratepayers from the highway project. I was really happy to join him in saying that the county council should not approve any capital expenditures that pass costs on to ratepayers for that project. The concessionaire must pay for that, or the state must pay for that. But the governor has been very clear that there should be no tax increase or really state funding for that public-private partnership, and that really extends to WSSC as well, and ratepayers or taxpayers. So I think that was an important discussion. Secondly, I wanted to compliment WSSC on the proposal for the additional customer facility. It's interesting, you never know when something will turn out to be more useful maybe than you originally imagined, but now as we're in this health crisis, having the ability to have an off-site center for customers to come in and handle their business with WSSC looks even better than it already did, which looked like a very useful access improvement. So compliments to Al Rashdi and the team for moving or requesting the support to move quickly on that opportunity. Final comment I wanted to make, we mentioned the issue of the downtown Silver Spring development. I know the committee chair has requested a briefing, I think at the committee soon. I do think we need to take this issue up. Another good reason to have a committee meeting soon. But a good analogy here is if you were building a hotel on a major state road or a major county road, and you added a small increment of traffic to the road, but you were made to pay the cost of rebuilding the entire road, all 10 lanes. And you had to borrow the money to build that 10-lane road, and then you were told you might get paid back, from future development along that road, if there is any, over the next 10 to 20 years. We're trying to move away from that kind of approach in our transportation policy because it is really, it puts an unfair burden on the development process, and it's one of the many reasons that we are not getting the kind of housing or commercial development that we would like. So we've got to come up with a different approach here that allows for projects to pay their fair share, but doesn't require them to shoulder the risk and the burden of an entire project when they really only make an incremental contribution to the use of the infrastructure. So I don't know what the answer is yet, but I think we've got to really dive into that and come up with a better approach so that we can have, here we have a project that wants to move forward right in downtown Silver Spring and has been really struggling with the weight of carrying this pipe infrastructure that is not just for itself, but really to serve the whole downtown. Thanks.
Thank you. I see no other speakers. With that, we have a recommendation, I guess, by the committee. Vice President Hucker, would you like to make a motion? Or
I move the committee recommendation on the WSSC CIP.
Second.
And it's been seconded by it was made by Vice President Hucker and seconded by Councilmember Reamer. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous. Thank you very much. Next, we're going to hear from a person by the name of Vice President Hucker, who will be telling us about the solid waste management at Goody Landfill remediation project. Please.
Yes, Mr. President, thank you. I wish I had better news for you, but the good news on this long delayed project is that at least it's moving forward, even if it does cost a lot. The Goody Landfill remediation is an ongoing project to construct what's called a 2-pay cap on the closed Goody Landfill to remediate low-level contamination, including low-level volatile organic compound contamination of the groundwater there. Not a pleasant subject, but something we have to address and not something that can be done cheaply. We've known about this for a long time. We have not had a full, accurate cost estimate in the CIP in the past. And now we have more information, and it's time to update the CIP and bite the bullet, essentially. The total cost of the project is $61.7 million, and the construction, thankfully, can begin in FY 2022. This is a significant increase from the previous CIP, and the reason is now that they've completed 60% the design documents to get to the 60% level. We have a much more accurate but higher cost estimate. The funding in the previous CIP was funded by the Solid Waste Disposal Fund. This increase will likely need to be funded by revenue bonds. There is no change in the project scope. The project scope includes waste excavation and relocation off-site. It includes installation of additional gas extraction wells, and it includes an evaluation of potential future land use for that important property. The large cost increase is now reflected in this CIP. The prior estimate was quite a few years old. And whether we like it or not, this is a mandated project based on an agreement we have with MDE, Maryland Department of the Environment, to address water quality issues around the landfill site. So with all that, the T&E committee recommends the approval of the project in the CIP as transmitted by the county executive. And let me, with your permission, call on Mr. Levchenko, Mr. President.
Please.
I don't have anything to add to what Councilmember Hucker noted. I think he stated it quite well.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Vice President Hucker. I had a question related to this item. I know it was a consent decree with MDE, as was mentioned, I think back in 2013, and obviously this is important that we do this. My question was, because of the significant cost increase, is there a timeline associated with this obligation? Would it be possible to move it 1 year, for example, freeing up $11 million for other projects, considering what's going on? So I guess that might be for Mr. Levchenko or others, but that was my question about the timing of the requirement.
Well, we do have DEP that can speak to the timing, but I did want to speak to the financial aspect. It is still assumed to be covered within the Solid Waste Disposal Fund, which is a self-supporting fund. So any changes in this project, either cost or timing would not affect the rest of the GEO bond supported CIP.
Great.
Sorry. Would not support the rest of the GEO bond supported CIP, so it does not free up resources for other projects. It does require us to find the resources within the solid waste disposal fund, which would be through solid waste charges. So it does affect, obviously, what property owners would see
residents pay.
Residents pay on their bill with the solid waste charges.
Yeah.
But it doesn't directly affect the GEO bond spending affordability.
Okay.
But with that said, I see Director Ortez is here, and he can speak to the timing of the project.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Levchenko and Mr. President, members of the council. Good to see you all. Councilman Jawando, appreciate the question. Mr. Hucker introduced this item, describing that this was the result of a consent decree. So we're basically severely out of compliance with ongoing groundwater contamination. So from both a legal standpoint in trying to comply with the consent order and with an environmental standpoint, it's the position of the department that we move with all deliberate speed. So with all due respect, we do ask the committee of the whole to proceed with the item as presented.
Okay. Thank you. That's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see no other speakers, and this was a committee recommendation. So all those in favor, please raise your hand. Opposed? Opposed? That carries unanimously as well. Next is Vice President Hucker. It's sort of like your own radio show. You're next for the storm drains, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. The storm drains project, thank you again, Mr. Levchenko, for your work on this, and Director Ortiz as well. We had a thorough presentation. The T&E committee had a thorough presentation on the storm drain program. In the county executive submitted these projects at the exact same funding level as in the previous CIP from FY19 to 24. The council staff had recommended increases in a couple of projects to address some significant backlogs in that work program, which the T&E committee also supported. Since these projects are funded by the Water Quality Protection Fund, which is, of course, a separate, discrete fund, they don't compete for GO bonds. However, they do affect, their cost affects the Water Quality Protection Charge annually, which appears on all of our and any property owners' property tax bill. Regarding the scope of it, there's no new standalone projects in this CIP. The T&E committee supported the council staff's recommendation to increase the level of effort in the facility planning storm drains project slightly by also the storm drain culvert replacement project significantly, and it's subject to the final review of the Water Quality Protection Fund and charge during the reconciliation of the operating budget, which obviously we'll all be doing very soon. The nice thing is also low interest, long-term financing from the Maryland Water Quality Revolving Fund continues to be the dominant funding source for the Water Quality Protection Charge. That was a change we made several years ago. So no general obligation bonds, no general fund current revenues are assumed to pay for the stormwater management CIP. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Levchenko to elaborate, or Director Ortiz, with your permission, Mr. President.
Yeah, just a couple points. We do have staff from the Department of Transportation here that can speak to the project specifically. Just a couple of other points to note. DEP is still working with DOT on the long-term financing approach for these storm drain projects. They're not quite as far along as they are on the DEP side or the stormwater management side, which we'll talk about next. So there's still some uncertainty there. They're optimistic that at least a couple of these projects will be eligible for this funding. They're still up in the air, unfortunately, with the culvert replacement project. So there's some uncertainty there. If the long-term financing is not available, as it is assumed in the recommended CIP, then the only other source immediately available would be water quality protection charge current revenue. And so that would be something we'd have to look at carefully. And I think we do need to reconsider this funding issue as part of the operating budget, as Mr. Hucker mentioned, before we approve the operating and CIPs in mid-May. With that said, I do want to emphasize that the backlogs in this work are substantial. And that's why staff recommended, and I think the committee was very supportive of the increase in the storm drain culvert replacement project. The infrastructure task force report that is updated annually showed that we are woefully behind in our work in that area. And it's a pay me now or a pay me later kind of issue. And we don't know necessarily what we can afford every year, but staff did feel it was important to put forth an increase this year and see what we can do. Like I said, we don't necessarily know what we'll end up with in mid-May, but I think as a starting point, we need to consider an increase in that project. And then the facility planning one as well needs to keep the projects moving through the process. So that's sort of a supportive element to this. One other project that staff was discussing with DOT and came to some conclusion after the committee session is in the storm drain general project. And on the cover sheet, on page 2 of the cover sheet, staff has a recommendation there that was not available at the time of the committee session. I am recommending an increase in the level of effort in that project. First in FY21, an increase from $854,000 annually to $940,000, and then starting in FY22, bumping that up to $1 million a year as the level of effort. So that's an element that was not part of the T&E committee recommendation. The other thing I did want to mention is that Councilmember Friedson had sent a memo to the committee seeking an increase in this project particularly. So I know he may want to speak to this project.
Thank you. In fact, Councilmember Friedson does want to speak to this, wants to speak. I'm assuming he'll tell us what it's about. Councilmember Friedson.
I appreciate that, Mr. Levchenko and Council President. There's less competition on the storm drain item in terms of speaking about it, but I think it really speaks to a core government responsibility, and appreciate Mr. Levchenko and the work of the Department of Transportation and the careful consideration of the committee, of the memo that I sent to colleagues, focusing really on the infrastructure task force report and the idea that we are woefully underfunded, unfortunately, for this key infrastructure. And while I would have loved to see a greater investment, I think that the recommendation that has been put forward for a slight increase in FY21 to $940,000 and then a 20% increase in FY22 and beyond to $1 million to reset the level of commitment moving forward is a really critical, good first step, and reflects both our new fiscal reality, but also the point that Mr. Levchenko just made, that it's pay me now or pay me more later when it comes to core government infrastructure. And investing in replacing and maintaining infrastructure is like investing in a college savings account or in a retirement account. You either invest the money early on or you spend more later on if you delay it. And the cost now is significant in a tight CIP, but it's even more expensive if you fail to do so. And so I strongly support that, and just wanted to point out that last summer we had a 200-year storm with a month's worth of rainfall that dropped in 1 hour. And just weeks later, 3 weeks later, we had a 50-year storm, or what we used to call 200-year storms and 50-year storms. And most of our storm drains and our culverts and our infrastructure is built only to handle 10-year storms. And when we have 50-year storms and 100-year storms and 200-year storms that happen over the course of a few weeks, which is becoming increasingly clear, and that the science with our climate change and warming temperatures are that the intensity and the length and severity of these storms are becoming more and more frequent, and 10-year storms are now not the high point of the expectations for what we can bear in terms of our infrastructure. They're becoming regular, and the significant storms are becoming far more significant and severe. To me, this is about getting back to basics of government, making sure that we are keeping up the essential core government services. And I just wanted to thank not only the T&E committee and Mr. Levchenko, but Tim Couples, Dan Sheridan, Kyle Hanley in the Department of Transportation team, along with Mr. Conklin, who are dealing with these challenges on a regular basis. After those major storms over the summer, I went and visited some of the blown culverts in District 1 that limited access over long periods of time to communities and neighborhoods. Had Department of Transportation personnel having to sleep overnight and work 24 hours to get those back online. And recently, Dan Sheridan and several other folks met at the historic Scotland Church on Seven Locks Road that I referenced earlier, which has had significant draining and other challenges related to the culverts underneath both the old Seven Locks Road from the historic church property and what's now considered the new Seven Locks Road, although that new Seven Locks Road was built decades ago. The bottom line is we have major infrastructure challenges. This is a core responsibility that we have, and I think this demonstrates a really important and thoughtful step forward by staff coming together and the committee with thoughtful consideration for the recommendation that I put forward. So I really appreciate that and hope to have full council support for it.
Thank you very much. I have no other speakers. Council Vice President Hucker, since this is a change from the committee recommendation, I believe we do need a motion on this one.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Vice President Hucker, seconded by Councilmember Friedson. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous. Thank you very much. And next, Councilmember Vice President Hucker, you have one more item on the list, and that's about stormwater management.
I do. Thank you, Mr. President. Most of you remember well all the drama around stormwater management policy in recent years. And you know that all the large Maryland counties that have MS4 permits are required to meet our overall goals to reduce nutrient pollution heading into the Bay watershed. We all know how important that is. The Bay is not just the environmental jewel of our state, it's part of our economic backbone as well, responsible for many jobs and much of our economic development. And like so much of what we've been talking about today, it costs a lot to re-envision and to re-engineer infrastructure that was largely built 50 to 100 years ago when most of the county was built. Like the multi-year retrofitting of our transportation network that we talked about earlier today to improve our multimodal transportation goals and reflect today's values, and like upgrading our aging WSSC infrastructure, whether it's the trunk lines or the facilities. There are also complicated and expensive, very important retrofits to our stormwater management system to improve our watershed that pays essential and lasting dividends for ourselves and for future generations that cost a lot and take a long time, but they really are essential and required under our agreements with both the federal government and the state. So, you know, this is an environmental burden we all contribute to with the stormwater that runs off our driveways and our parking lots and our aging shopping centers and our streets. It includes oil and fertilizer from our lawns and pet waste and other contaminants. And in the CIP, there are currently 9 ongoing projects and only 1 new project. The county executive recommended an increase of $7.2 million over the 6 years. Major changes in the previous CIP included a substantial reduction in the 6-year spending. And as Mr. Levchenko noted in his packet, this is somewhat of a wait and see CIP. Director Ortiz and his staff are eager to get going with more projects, but we are still, and we have been for a long time, waiting for MDE to approve our new MS4 permit, which will guide their work over the next 4 years. And so until we know what our goals and requirements are under that, it's hard to make dramatic changes to our current program. I think I've probably said enough. The T&E committee recommends approval as was transmitted by the county executive, and I'll turn it over with your permission to Mr. Levchenko.
Yeah, just to note a couple other points. The one increase that was recommended by the executive was in the stormwater management facility major structural repair project. There's a significant backlog they're looking to address there, so they are recommending a ramp up in that. They are also moving forward with some stormwater management CIP work in advance of the permit. You may recall a couple of years ago, much of the work was suspended pending the implementation of the design, build, maintain contract, which was a new method for how to deliver these projects. That project, although it's being redesigned by the new administration, is still awaiting the permit that Councilmember Hucker mentioned. But in advance of that, several suspended projects have been moved forward that DEP felt were urgent enough and far enough along that they could be done. And then several others are being evaluated. So it is important to note that while this is a wait and see, DEP is moving forward with work. What's most important about the permit is it will determine, I guess, where the priorities will be and where the work needs to be put in order to meet the permit. And the county is well positioned because we have a lot of projects that have been looked at and are ready to move forward to the next step if they ultimately are high priorities within the state's regime for this permit. So right now we do have a relatively steady level of effort shown. There's still some work to be done on the design, build, maintain or turnkey project in terms of fashioning that to best optimize our results under the permit. But this is basically waiting for the state to get its draft permit out so that we can move forward.
Thank you. I see no other speakers. This was a committee recommendation. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you. That is unanimous. Next, we're going to hear about the Revenue Authority, and that's Council Member Reamer.
Thank you. I will turn to a moment to Jeff Zions to walk through the sort of particulars, but two overarching points. The Revenue Authority is seeking approval for some acquisition of land around the air park so that we can remove obstacles for planes coming and going there. And then secondly, additional progress and funding on an initiative that is quite exciting. It's called the Poolsville Economic Development Project. Actually, we might have changed the name of that here, but it's a winemaking facility, and it's using county land, Revenue Authority land near the Poolsville Golf Course, and there is a crush facility so that grape growers, vintners can process their grapes, crush them, and make wine without having to purchase the very expensive equipment that a boutique winery might struggle to purchase up front. So it's sort of like a sharing of costs, and it will hopefully help spur more entrepreneurialism in the winemaking industry in the county, which is starting to take off. Councilmember Rice and I have worked together on a number of initiatives. We have some incredible wineries that have bought very large properties up near Clarksburg, Black Ankle Winery, Old Westminster Winery, adding to Windridge Vineyards across the street from Councilmember Rice's house, and Rockland's Vineyard off of Montevideo Road. So there's quite a growing winery sector in the county, and this facility is intended to help support the growth of that. And it's an exciting one to see. I know Keith Miller has been working on it for years, worked hard to get state funding and has been able to get some state funding, but the county is stepping up, and there's an important and interesting workforce development angle here. There's a partnership with the University of Maryland to have students gain access to the facility for their degree programs, and I think Montgomery College may have a certificate program as well that ties in. So there's just a lot going on here. It's really interesting, and it, I think, is about the council and the county's continuing reinvention of the agricultural reserve and thinking about it in different ways, allowing different kinds of uses that are really valued by the public and well recognized. And I do want to recognize the county executive on this item. This has been something of real interest to him over the years, and he's played an important role in moving this particular project forward as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zions. Just to talk about the Poolsville Economic Development Project, it now has a new name called the Crossvines Poolsville Economic Development Project. This was approved already in the current CIP. The difference here, aside from the name, is that there's an addition of $1.8 million to cover an expanded parking lot and stormwater management facilities. That's essentially all the changes to that project. It is different than a lot of the Revenue Authority's project. The Revenue Authority will bond the project. The county will pay the debt service to that, and at some point hopefully get paid back by the Revenue Authority. The two other projects in the Revenue Authority's budget are both land acquisition projects around the air park. These are dependent upon FAA funding. If the FAA does not fund those land acquisitions, they will not go forward. So it's a hold harmless CIP projects for the Revenue Authority. That's it. Thank you very much. Councilmember Rice.
Thank you very much, Council President, and thank you very much to Councilmember Reamer, to Mr. Zients, but also to my good friend Keith Miller. This is really exciting. I remember some years ago that we had this conversation about this topic, and it's really exciting to see it come this far. And Councilmember Reamer, you couldn't be more correct about what this means for this region. You know, now that I actually live in the agricultural reserve, it's really exciting because I get to see all the time the continued investment that continues to go and what's happening up here and how exciting it is. I mean, before COVID-19 had hit, the creative things that they're doing right across the street here at Windridge Vineyards, they're putting up a brand new tasting hall that will also serve as a special events venue. These are the kinds of things that are really game changers for us. And the reality is that having this Crossvines crushing facility actually means that we will be the attractor for Northern Virginia, for Pennsylvania. Folks will actually bring some of their stuff down here, ship it here to Montgomery County to be crushed. That's a big deal. That really says a lot and puts a big stamp on us as a region. And so I'm really excited about that. So thank you for all the effort that the Revenue Authority has done, that all who have supported these great projects have done. We really are making a tremendous difference in terms of the strides that are happening here in Montgomery County when it comes to advancing our wineries and breweries and cideries here in Montgomery County. And thanks to the leadership of Councilmember Reamer, who's really been leading that effort. So thank you, sir, for that. I did have a question, Jeff, and it was pertaining to our Cup ball field renovations and understanding that piece of it. Is that a part of this as well?
Not at all. That's not part of the CIP projects at all. That's not a Revenue Authority issue right now.
Beautiful. All right. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Yes, thank you. I'll be very brief on this one, I promise, but I just want to thank Councilmember Rice for his comments. Windridge Vineyards is just barely in over the line in District 1, so I'm going to claim it as our own in District 1, but it's a tremendous place, and you know, along with Rocklands and so many others, such a great example of the agricultural reserve needing to not only be environmentally sustainable but economically sustainable, and how the agritourism and agribusiness more broadly is such a key part of that. This project is so instrumental from an educational and economic development and agricultural perspective. And I just really appreciate Councilmember Rice, your continued advocacy for the Ag Reserve, Councilmember Reamer, who's been at the forefront of all of these agribusinesses, the farm breweries and wineries and cideries and other efforts, and give credit to the prior council and including the county executive when he was on the council, as was mentioned earlier, for the leadership on getting this through and the foresight of making it happen. It's going to be key to us in our competitiveness and our quality of life and our economic development. And I see it as a huge path forward, not just for Poolesville, but for the entire county and the broader region. So thank you very much, and look forward to finally getting this project moved forward.
Thank you. This was a committee recommendation. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Opposed? That carries unanimously as well. Mr. Zients, it was good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Thank you. Next is the Public Arts Trust, and that would be Council Member Rice. Yes?
Yes. Well, Thank you very much, Mr. President. Appreciate it. And I know that we have Ms. Jenkins on the line with us as well in the studio, in the Zoom studio, who's our Chief Executive Officer of our Arts and Humanities Council for Montgomery County. I just want to say that to start things off and kind of level set where we are, our Public Arts Trust has been woefully underfunded. Everyone knows that. We've had the conversations about this for a number of years, and so we know this. But it's not even just that it's been woefully underfunded. It's actually been woefully underfunded from what we truly promised the arts community that we were going to do. So we never really honored what it was that we intended, nor said that we were going to do to make sure that we were taking care of these public treasures in our community. And so when you really think about it, a lot of our things are actually in critical need, similar to what Councilmember Friedson was talking about some of the infrastructure with WSSC and some of the storm drains and things like that, things that have just been left and no one has really talked about it and given it the investment. So we as a committee, just to sum things up, I don't need to drag this out because I hope that folks will be supportive, as the committee was, in saying that we would start to get ourselves aligned with what the guideline truly was when it came to the appropriation. The appropriation needed to be and should have always been somewhere in the range between $289,000 to $488,000 over the years. That corrective funding would allow for us to really increase the maintenance and conservation expenses that were there, as well as ensure that we're really getting a better public art strategy as a whole when it comes to ensuring that we take care of what we've already purchased, as well as make sure that we're protecting these things for future years to come. So a lot of it is repair, but a lot of it is also maintenance to make sure, because all it's going to do is cost us more money later. And so from that perspective, when we're really looking at the small sum, when we really look at our budget as a whole, that we're looking to invest in this, I just really believe it's the right thing to do. I really want to thank my colleagues on the Education and Culture Committee, both Councilmember Navarro and Councilmember Giwando, for their tremendous support of the arts community. I want to give a special shout out to Councilmember Navarro. I do this all the time, for adding culture to education. It really is a great fit for us. And so it really allows us to highlight the arts, and we've had some great conversations as a result. So it really is exciting. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Jenkins and then Ms. Chen to certainly weigh in on anything. But just to kind of let you know, we've got hundreds of pieces of art. We really need to make sure that we're doing what we need to. The county executive had put forth in a reduced amount of funding. We truly believe that this is the right amount of funding to get us back on track and take care of those precious pieces. So I'll turn it over. Let's start with Ms. Jenkins, and then we'll go to Ms. Chen.
Thank you so much, and good morning, council members. It's so great to see you. When I'm looking at the 10 of our pictures, it's been a great partnership, and I so appreciate all of you. All of you are staunch advocates. I know each one of you, and I've had great conversations with each one of you. So, Councilmember Rice, I think you've said it all. We've got these great investments. We want to make sure that we don't lose them. I was talking to Councilmember Albornoz yesterday. He and I were together in October of 2008 when, we had this major fall of Lehman Brothers. And right after that, we saw that the lack of maintenance and conservation for the assets that the county already has invested in, were sorely depleted. We came to the council member with 9 small bags of debris, detritus from artworks that were out in the public realm, and we handed them to each council member on the dais and said, if you appreciate public art, this is what is happening to our public art. And it was, I think, a strong statement to help us understand that we've already made these investments. And so what we're asking for are the funds to make sure that we can secure our investments. I also want to say that this is a great time to support the Public Art Trust because I know that all of you have done just exactly what my family and I have done, and that is turn to the arts during this really difficult time. We've seen that artists respond to what's going on, and we've seen so many incredible concerts, movies, expressions of art, compassion, solace offered by the arts community. And with this additional appropriation, I'm hoping we can also think about how we might be able to support these individual artists who are also usually a part of this public art conversation to help them because we know that they are sorely hurting. So I would just say, I cannot even say more strongly how much I appreciate these intentions for support. I urge you to support the Public Art Trust. While I'm not tone deaf, though, I know that all of the issues that we've spoken about today and all of the issues that are associated with the pandemic are deep and difficult for the county to make all of these hard decisions. This is but a very small part of the budget. And so I would urge you to consider Councilmember Rice's recommendation that we support the Public Art Trust in this way. We want to take care of our current assets as well as make sure that we are supporting the creative workforce as much as we can. Just as an aside, I'll tell you that we've had some returned funding and some small grants. It often happens that either an organization's budget was smaller than they thought or whatever. Anyhow, we had about $40,000 in return grant funds, and we just distributed those to individual artists and scholars this week via electronic funds transfer. And the messages that we are getting back from these individual artists and scholars who are of the gig economy, often without health insurance, often without support, rendered me to sobbing last night to just read some of these notes. Your support is appreciated.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Chen, please. Ms. Chen. Is she on?
Hi, can you hear me?
There you go.
Okay, great. Hate when I have to do that. So I think the summary was really great. I just wanted to add that that increasing the public arts fund will be a great platform in order to jumpstart what we will need to have a lot of work done in order to bring the arts and humanities community in Montgomery County thriving again. So with these funds, it's about creating jobs for our experts and for our contractors that will be able to help get this work done. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you. And Ms. Jenkins, we feel you. That emotion is real, and we are all feeling that right now. And we so appreciate the work of your incredible organization, and our heart goes out to every single one of our artists in the community right now, and all of the organizations who are doing what they can to continue to enrich our lives in so many different ways. And there's no question that the Arts and Humanities Council is going to be a critical player in the healing that we are all going to need as we get through this pandemic. And I also just want to acknowledge how important the Public Arts Trust is. I've had the opportunity to sit on the meetings in all aspects of this, from the residents that come together to make the very thoughtful and deliberative decisions on which public art goes in which particular facilities. And it is a very well thought out process. It's actually beautiful to see the community come together. And then, of course, there's the issue of ensuring that the maintenance of these incredible pieces of art are kept to the standard that we know are important for all of us. Because when they're not only is it just a travesty from a cultural perspective, but it can create blight within some of the facilities where these incredible pieces of artwork reside. And so I know that I fully support the committee's recommendations and hope and pray that one day we will get to a point where we're going to be in a better position to support projects just like this to the degree to which they deserve. But this is certainly something, the least of which we can do right now. And I really do want to appreciate the Arts and Culture Committee for your deliberation and your work on this very critical issue. So thank you, and I wholeheartedly support this recommendation.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you to Ms. Jenkins for continually, she's always reminding us of the critical importance that art plays in our everyday just living here in Montgomery County. When we had that committee meeting, we spoke about how public art also serves as landmarks, right? And it serves to remind us whenever we travel, we're just walking around in our community. That's one thing that we always remember. It's a public art. It's an art piece. Children remember that. And so it is so important for us to preserve, protect what we have invested. And in that committee meeting, I shared an interesting anecdote. And, I think it was like 18 years ago when I was just starting to grow Centro Familia, we came up with this idea to partner with the Long Branch Unity Festival and launch El Día de los Niños festival along with the Unity Festival. And so we worked to ensure that we would do outreach, and we had bilingual flyers, and it was about, El Día de los Niños, the Day of the Child, the New American Children, and we had an amazing, amazing day where we had the police come and talk about safety in terms of bicycle, and we had bicycles donated, and we had ice cream vendors, and we had music, and it was just amazing. What people didn't know was that I actually had to ask for police protection, because when we put out those flyers in 2 languages, I received threats saying that we were dividing the community. And, we're talking about Long Branch, for God's sakes, right? And we went through with it, but, in the back of my mind, I had to look around because I was threatened. My life was threatened. But think about this. Part of the day was to create these little plaques where these children would write their dreams, right? What do I want to be when I grow up? What is my dream for my community? All of these beautiful Black and brown faces, drawing their dreams. And right now, if you go to the Long Branch Recreation Center and you go up the steps, you will see these little plaques because we partner with an artist, a Latina artist, Assad, and she worked with the children, and that is there. And every time I think about this, I'm reminded of all of these children who now are like 18 years old, etc., and their dreams and how they're being realized because of this great community. But we have to preserve these types of public art. And I think Ms. Jenkins said, I didn't even realize that it was, that partnership the Centro Familia had with the Long Branch Unity Festival and the Día de los Niños. So we need to make sure that that is also written. So I share this because these types of public art, they do endure. They tell a story. They tell a story about our community. They tell a story about our dreams and our hopes. And Ms. Jenkins, you're absolutely correct. My daughters are here quarantining with me, at home. And we have, tuned into some amazing concerts that have taken place, some reggaeton concerts that apparently been pretty historic. And it has really cheered us, because during these times of difficulty, there is no doubt that, some really awesome music or beautiful movie or a documentary at least helps you ease this tension. So shout out to all those artists that are right now, through their creative minds, putting forth ways where we can still consume art. But no doubt that this is definitely a small token in our way to continue to protect and preserve the public art that we have in Montgomery County. So thank you. And your background is kind of like public art to me right now. I'm just here feeling completely transported to some, I don't know, Caribbean place that the color of that water, all of that seems real familiar to me. So thank you, because that's also brightened my day today.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Council President. I agree. We need to be wherever Ms. Jenkins is right now. I won't say much because a lot's been said, but I did want to say that, some of these public art projects are in schools. They actually could present a safety hazard, right? So there's actually safety reasons, in addition to all the psychological and, economic development reasons to make sure that we keep this public art in great condition. As Councilmember Albornoz mentioned, when we come out of this, I think one of the things I'm missing the most, and I think a lot of people are missing the most, is just appreciating outside and appreciating our community. And I think there is going to be a strong desire and need to have that happen, and making sure that we keep these places that we go to. And I think you're going to see more use, and it's actually going to have a great benefit to our community once we get through this crisis. So this was a no-brainer when we did it. It's even more of a no-brainer now. And I want to thank Councilmember Rice and Navarro, my colleagues on the Education and Culture Committee. And I hope that we vigorously support this, which I'm sure we will. So thank you, Ms. Jenkins, for all the work you're doing. Thank you for supporting artists and creatives, and look forward to working with you going forward.
Thank you. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. Susan, I really appreciated your comments, and thank you for sharing your receipt of the messages from many of the artists and creators. I wondered if you could just really briefly tell us how many of them are grappling. I would imagine that some artists, maybe many of them, are eligible for the gig economy, the contractor unemployment insurance. But you want to just, while we have you here, tell us what you're hearing.
Well, what we're hearing is this story. So on March 13th, I hired an artist to help us with the Public Arts Trust. And when she came to work on the 16th, she came to work, I guess, on the 14th, right before we broke. And she said, "Thank you for hiring me. My husband has been laid off, and I am the only wage earner in my house right now, and I have 2 kids in high school." Her story is the story that we're hearing over and over and over again by artists, carpenters, lighting directors, dramateurs, name it. It's not just that person with a muse, but we're hearing over and over again. We've got about 40 individual artists and scholars that we support, and so the funding that I talked about was just right to those artists and scholars. But I will tell you that I am in conversations almost every day at the local, state and federal level. And federally, what we're hearing is that gig economy workers are really in dire distress. Yesterday, there were some great articles about what's happening in Hollywood, and Hollywood is not expected to open until August. And that is that whole community is full of gig workers. My cousin is a carpenter in Hollywood, and he hasn't worked since about the 10th of March. And so I can't imagine, and his wife works for a university, and so she also has been furloughed. I don't know how they're making it. But what we're seeing all across the nation is that everything that we can possibly do to think about creative ways of hiring artists to do whatever work that needs to be done, I think is really critical. And then I've said this before, I'll continue to say it. I think that as we reimagine ourselves, Hans, and we think about things that we can do, my colleagues in Seattle have have this great model of embedding artists in different divisions, say the Department of Transportation. You know, you were just talking about these vintners. Arts and Humanities Council went to a local vineyard for our holiday party, and we had a great time there, and we saw all the expansive land, and we thought about, hey, you know, artists could come and do things out here. There are all kinds of ways I think that that we could think about putting artists, whether it's, you know, HHS, transportation, whatever departments that we're talking about, economic development, and looking at how we might come to recovery through this different creative lens. I think it could be really a groundbreaking thing for Montgomery County. And before I stop talking, I just wanted to add one more thing and to ask not to move to the 0.005% as is recommended in Carolyn's packet, but let's just stay at the 0.05% of capital budgets. We don't want to go backwards, and I think our county and the size of it will require more, not less. Sorry.
Thanks. That was relevant to the amendment we're considering. You know, I think it would be useful for maybe the council to talk about with the committee some kind of a strategic plan for the arts sector in the wake. I mean, I remember hearing early on from a performer, she runs a quartet. Every performance this summer canceled. You know, if you're a musician, the chances that you'll be able to perform in public again, you know, it's unknowable when that might be. You know, our two kids take music lessons, and fortunately we're able to do that with Zoom. Actually, it's been working. But, you know, if you're a performer publicly, it's a very difficult time. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you. I just quickly wanted to say that I agree with keeping, at least as an aspirational goal, to demonstrate our commitment, the current standard that is there. While I appreciate the recommendation by staff, I agree with Ms. Jenkins. And I think I just wanted to highlight, you know, the arts are about culture, and they're about education, and they're about quality of life, but it's also about economic development, and it's a key part of it. And Councilmember Reamer's comments about our artists, which are critical, and as Councilmember Albanaz and others have said, they're such an important part of not just the quality of life in Montgomery County, but the economic landscape of Montgomery County. We need to make sure that we're supporting them. And I'll just say that, as I know all of us are big supporters of public art, and public art really is the enduring collective diary of the civilization. And we need to make sure that we support it, and that we invest in it, and that we make sure that we are allowing each of us collectively and individually to keep that diary.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice for a motion, please.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. So the committee recommended 3-0 to increase the funding from the county executive's recommended 190 to 408 in the consecutive years of FY21 through 26, and I'd like to move that at this point.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
It was seconded by Councilmember Giwando. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Opposed? It carries unanimously. Thank you very much. And with that, we are now going to go to recess. We will be back at 1:30, where we are starting many public hearings. So we will see everyone in about an hour and 15 minutes. Thank you very much.
Maryland and bought a shovel. He then went home, and a little bit later in that evening, he committed just a grisly homicide of his entire family.